Hello and welcome, everyone. And uh, we're continuing our history podcast of, I guess, Roman history. This was supposed to be about the great men, but we're telling the story of history. This time it'll be Maverick who leads. So take it away.
Okay. So we initially wanted to talk about Flavius Attius, and I decided that if we just go straight to him, we're falling into the trap of the usual Julius Caesar, Augustus, Marcus Aurelius fall of Rome.
Just a
I think
note,
that's very unhelpful. Yes.
you said you decided, and I agreed like a giddy schoolgirl going to a rock concert. We must emphasize that.
Yes. I'm gonna try to keep it brief for Joe and I. It does not mean brief for most people, but I will try because we're trying to get to Attius here. So we're gonna start with the second century. The Goths, according to Jordanes, who was a Goth himself living in Constantinople a couple hundred years after this, says that the Goths originated in Skansa, we call Scandinavia. They believed it was an island because they were not aware of the part that goes up, to the Arctic Circle and then back down into Russia. They believed it was an island. They crossed the Baltic to the area around the Vistula, and they start migrating south. We think of the Goths as a horde people, like an unmounted steppe nomad almost. They were actually an agricultural society, but because of reasons that we aren't really aware of, we can only guess on, they were forced into the nomadic life. So they moved south from the Baltic area into the Pontic steppe, uh, like think modern day Ukraine. That was in the second century AD, and they forced the Sarmatians and the Macromani to the Danube and forced them over the Danube, much like the Huns will later do to them. That starts the Macromani Wars that Rome has to fight and has to deal with, and it really sets off the Eastern flood of barbarians that Rome will deal with until hundreds of years later after what we're talking about here. This hit at a really poor time for Rome. It's known as the crisis of the third century. Um, it's noted for several ongoing wars with the Persians. That really never stops until a point later in the story. An excellent book on that subject is called Rome and Persia by Adrian Goldsworthy. I highly recommend that book and pretty much everything he puts out. They also, in the classic Roman style, had several political usurpations, a lot of assassinations, a lot of emperors, a lot of local magistrates getting replaced, getting thrown out, getting assassinated, getting executed. It led to the Danube and then a lot of the Eastern Empire to be very unstable and not able to properly deal with these migratory people. They also started to suffer attacks from the Western Germans. Think like the classic Swaby that we've hear about in the Roman narrative from Julius Caesar onward. So because of those Western Germans, the Danubian army is actually forced to withdraw to the west to deal with those Germans who were actively raiding. And with the opening of the frontier, the Goths start to raid across the Danube. Around 238, we get the first uh, mention of payments being made to the Goths. Uh, this starts the trend of the um, this is not the term yet, but we would call them federati or a foedus is signed. It's not used yet, but it's about that. So they start paying these Goths to not raid across the Danube and to join the Roman army. We have record of a significant amount of Goths fighting in the Roman army against Persia. So this is very early. This is in 242 when we first see Goths in service against the Persians. And this is also why you can see Gothic societies in Anatolia. They seem really out of place to us now, but Anatolia was a hotbed for Gothic culture for a long time after this, much like it was for Celtic culture before. And this sets the trend of Gothic raiding. Romans pay the Goths to stop, to hire them. Goths get uppity again. You start the process over. They also begin, this is also very interesting to connect to the later Vikings in the early Middle Ages. They begin raiding the Black Sea coast. So the Romans own much of the Black Sea coast, but the Goths, being in the modern day Ukraine, have Crimea and the Sea of Azov. They launch very similar ships to the Viking longship down across the Black Sea coast, and they raid all throughout the 230s and 240s. And by 268, they've amassed so much wealth and so much power in the Black Sea that they can form a fleet of 2,000 ships and other small craft. And they attempt to force their way through the Dardanelles to break out into the Aegean and possibly the Mediterranean. The Romans and their navy are able to mount a pretty successful defense of the Dardanelles for a time, but eventually the Goths are able to break out, and they kind of go off on what I've called a micro Gothic Viking age that was very brief, but had all the characteristic events and tropes of the later Viking age. This massive fleet splits into three. One lands near Thessalonica in northern Greece around Macedonia. Another lands in Attica near Athens and eventually moves into the Peloponnesus. And the other one, the most successful one, goes into the Aegean and hits Rhodes, Cyprus, Crete, Cide, and then lands in Asia Minor. And they even sacked the ancient city of Troy. Um, the Romans, in the first two cases, the ones that landed near Thessalonica and in Attica, are actually dealt with extremely competently by the local forces. It wasn't even like the Roman Imperial Army showing up. It was the Roman governors putting together militias to fight these Goths off. And we can assume that the reason they were able to beat them off is because the Goths were not looking for fights. They were just trying to raid. This also could point to the virility left in the Roman populations that at this time in the third century, they're still able to muster enough men that know how to fight, that have the equipment, um, unlike in later centuries. But the two that are met in Greece are eventually subdued, and the survivors of those Gothic armies are settled in the Balkans. The Romans called it Illyricum. That third group that hit Asia Minor is able to get back on their ships after tangling with the local Romans and make it back to Crimea to stay in the Gothic territories east of the Danube. Another notable thing about those engagements in Greece is how effective the Roman cavalry was. Roman cavalry nowadays has a pretty bad reputation because of the few battles where they got smashed by Hannibal's Numidians and because of Crassus's defeat against the Parthians. In almost every other instance that we see the Roman cavalry pop up, they're either doing extremely important campaigning work like scouting, foraging, running down fleeing enemies, or they're being, almost Alexandrian in battle, charging in, destroying the enemy themselves, and then running them down. This is one of those instances where they are the primary military arm against these Goths. These Goths clearly don't have a cavalry force of their own, and they are very vulnerable to the Roman cavalry, who are able to hit them quick, very fast tactically, and then run them down after the battle. This was the first major action of
You just
Claudius the
froze up.
Second.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Maverick? Uh, you froze up for a minute,
Okay.
and
What was the last thing I said?
something about the Goths, I think.
The Goths. Well, I'm talking about the Goths.
Yeah,
Okay. So
you only
I'll
froze
start
for a
again.
minute,
Okay.
just to be clear.
So so these actions, the two armies that the Romans faced in Greece, northern Greece and southern Greece,
Mhm.
um, the Roman militias are able to deal with very effectively.
Yeah.
And Claudius II is able to come down with a force of Roman cavalry who perform very well, even though Roman cavalry nowadays gets a poor reputation undeservedly because of the few instances Hannibal's Numidians defeated them or Crassus's defeat against the Parthians. Um,
When in
but
reality, the fact of the matter is that um, um, Roman cavalry under Trajanus in the second century utterly just
hmm
demolished the Parthians.
hmm
And Roman cavalry also demolished Hannibal Barca's forces and
they did.
demolished the Greeks in the Third Macedonian Wars under
Yeah.
Scipio's brother. And they also utterly, sorry, I don't know why that went off. Um, and they utterly demolished most of their enemies up until the fifth century. Even in the
Yeah.
third and fourth centuries, Roman cavalry was still top of the world and was demolishing
Yes.
everyone.
Yes.
This is
And these
not the Chinese
actions.
cavalry, which was an embarrassment to Cao Cao, so that he had to mass replace, in effect, a great replacement of Han Chinese
hmm
in the uh, third century, which honestly was kind of evil of Cao Cao. It's why he's not well remembered. It's because he brought in the Xiongnu, the ancestors of the Mongols, to replace his people because he thought, well, I need soldiers fast, and I'm losing men, and I need to
hmm
replace those I lose faster because the enemy keeps winning against him. So he kept replacing, and his successors kept replacing until they were overthrown by the Xiongnu
Mm.
after a century of this policy. But the thing
Interesting.
is, the Romans never did that,
hmm
and the Romans were still the top dog of cavalry warfare
Yeah.
until the fifth century, when they did replace their cavalry officers completely with barbarians.
With the Goths
Yeah. Now the
and the
Goths were
Vandals.
confident, but not Romans.
hmm
If they had faced the Romans of 2 centuries ago, they'd have been demolished.
Yeah. Well, and they were in the third century.
And I'll
Um,
even go so far as to say there's a reason the Frank were in reality a mixed Gallo-Roman people. The Frank would utterly demolish the Gauls in cavalry warfare, and the Lombards, um, time and time again in the time of Clovis and Charlemagne. They just
hmm
keep demolishing them because they just couldn't. The real cavalry successors of Rome were in reality the Frank.
mm,
Just saying.
yes.
Yeah, the knight is modeled after the equestrian knight
Oh yeah,
in a lot
clearly,
of ways.
clearly,
Yeah.
there's a through line between the equestrian class and the knights.
Yep.
Um,
Anyways, keep going.
so I just wanted to highlight. Joe seemed to enjoy that the Roman cavalry's effectiveness against the Goths. Um, it was a little uneven because, like I said, these Goths were raiding parties. These were not like war parties. And they also wouldn't have had cavalry themselves. We do think of the Goths as a strong cavalry power only because of the Battle of Adrianople. And I will get to that. But really, until
But
that point, the Goths were not known for cavalry at all. That was more the Vandals, who were another
mm,
migrating Germanic group. Yes, Joe?
oh no, I was only going to say, but the Goths. Let's give them their due. After Adrianople, they do show themselves to be pretty good in war, especially those
hmm
who established themselves in Spain.
Yes.
They build an advanced civilization. So, like,
Mm.
give the devil his due.
hmm
I tend to think
I'm
the
a Goth
Goths.
fanboy through and through.
I tend to think the Goths were better architecturally and culturally than in war, but they were still decent warriors
Yeah,
because
because go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, I was only going to say that they are not given the respect they deserve from because they lost to the Moors. But we have to bear in mind they faced betrayals. They were outnumbered like 100 to 1. They were,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the savagery of the Islamic Moors was incomparable to anything that was seen up until that point in history.
Yes. Well,
Um,
they were also attacked during a dynastic crisis. They
yeah,
were not an organized group when they were hit by the Moors.
mm. And it only took one of them to go establish himself in what would come to be known as Asturias, in the
Mm-hmm.
least fertile region of Spain. And he would,
Mm-hmm.
from there, begin the Reconquista. But he was, but we have to bear in mind that the nations that would retake the Hispanic Peninsula were not Visigothic; they were Spanish and
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese. Uh, that sounds like the Portuguese are an afterthought. Which, if there's any Portuguese listening, yes, you are. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Well, when we're talking
Uh,
about the history of the
but
Iberian Peninsula, I kind of are.
to an extent. But
Yeah, to an extent. They shouldn't be,
but
but they are.
yeah, but they're freaking cool because uh, wow, we'll get to that at some point. But
We will.
but
We will, Joe.
The Goths are great, but they are not Roman.
No, no.
And
And we will see that later.
I've had professors say the barbarians were more advanced in war than the Romans were in their golden age. No, no, no,
Oh,
no.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
That is
that is
ridiculous.
nonsense. That is utterly nonsense. Only a nonce would say that, as the British would call it. Just un vrai abruti. An abruti, which is an imbecile of the highest order. That's the translation from French to English would ever say that because the Romans were advanced. You would not see an army of their caliber for centuries until probably Charlemagne.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you'd next see a professional army of the highest caliber out there. But the East would retain a professional army, so we do have to, like, I'm talking about the West. But in the East, the professional army would remain for centuries until it just be dismissed for some reason. Um, but yeah, now
Mm-hmm.
do carry on. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, you're good. Please keep it up. Um, with these actions with the Roman cavalry against these raiding Goths, Claudius II names himself Gothicus, the very first emperor to claim that victorious title, much like Scipio Africanus or is his brother Asiaticus. Um, was that the name he took on? So Claudius II becomes Gothicus, and that is in 268 AD. We will now move on to Aurelian, who Joe and I are both big fans of.
Yeah, I squeal like a schoolgirl whenever I hear him, or I
Yeah.
would, but I have a bit of a, well, I have a cough right now, so I can't squeal.
Mhm.
But Aurelian, just to plug my books a little, Aurelian is the
Hmm,
inspiration
please.
for one major character in my lore, Veritien, Veritian.
Hmm.
So I base one major character who is of the utmost importance off of Aurelian, with his sword being a key artifact in my history. So Aurelian is very, very cool.
Yes, he is. And Aurelian will show Roman dominance over barbarian military
And I would argue
abilities.
we don't see his level of military competency until Charlemagne,
Mm,
because Aurelian is just on a whole other level. I know people like Constantine, but Constantine's nothing compared to this guy militarily.
hmm.
Aurelian, now Constantine had his son, Crispus, and others that he could rely upon to help. Aurelian had no one. It was just a one man show. Charlemagne did later rely on his sons, who proved very competent military men. But
Hmm.
Charlemagne himself, before that, had to Aurelian his way through Europe in conquest after conquest himself before he passed on to a lot of the duties to his sons. But Aurelian is just such a brilliant figure that he deserves to be ranked up there with Caesar, Agrippa. and others. He is the last truly, in some ways, magnificent military conqueror in the old Roman fashion.
For sure.
Um, yeah, if you were to take him and transplant him to any previous era in Roman history, he'd have been the most glorious emperor.
Oh,
Like,
if Aurelian had the resources and the professional army of the Augustan era, the sky's the limit with what he could have accomplished.
yeah.
Um,
And if he had followed after Marcus Aurelius, you'd have seen another era of great expansion, of consolidation, of rebuilding, and Rome would have carried on for another century,
oh,
at
for sure, it
least.
would have.
But he came too late, and well, tragedy haunts Rome in this era.
hmm It's sad to think that only 270 AD is too late. Um,
Mm,
even though the empire in the West and our perception of it will still last for another 200 years, um, it's sad to think that that's still too late
mm.
to keep it in its current form.
But it's just, I still mourn the loss of Aurelian.
Yeah,
It's just
it's
he
it's
he
a
was
heavy one.
he was taken from us too soon. He still had too many
Dude,
conquests ahead of him. He still
uh-huh.
has so much glory behind ahead of him. And he also rebuilt the walls of Rome. He
Yeah.
expanded the city. He like the current walls are him. Like
hmm
like the old ancient walls were his construction. The Aurelian walls. He expanded like so much of the service. He reformed the dole. He took care of the welfare system, which was important. He took care of the walls. He was interested in architecture, in construction. He was interested also in showing, you could even say he's a model of chivalry, because, he would not execute women or
hmm
certain defeated enemies. Hell, the head of the Gallic Empire, he would spare him and his son. Chivalry was very important to Aurelian. He was a very merciful man, but he was a very intelligent one. In a lot of ways, I think he was modeling himself after Caesar, and he
Mm.
was truly a good successor, a worthy successor to Caesar and Caesar Augustus. But the crisis was determined to go on.
hmm So Aurelian is crowned in 270 AD, just after Claudius's defeat of this massive Gothic raiding fleet, and immediately he deals with the Vandals on the Hungarian plain. And again, this is very notable for Roman military efficiency and its cavalry specifically. When we think the Hungarian plain, we think the perfect territory in Europe for horse armies to do well. And the Vandals, even at this time, are known as expert horsemen. And he defeats them. He destroys the Vandals, just crushes them on the Hungarian plain, and then immediately has to go back to Italy to face these Western Germans that are raiding across again and have reached northern Italy. He goes and defeats them very quickly, very easily. And then in 271, immediately again goes back east to the Danube and has to beat back the Goths that have crossed the Danube. And he does what the other emperors really hadn't done up to this point on a large scale. He starts crossing the Danube and attacking the Goths in their own territory. And the Goths actually develop.
Chad.
Yeah. He was not messing around with these guys. He he chases them into their own territory, and this is where the Goths actually, even though they're remembered now as good warriors, they develop to their contemporaries a pretty poor military reputation because of the way Aurelian handled them on their own territory. He kills their king. I'm not very good at Gothic pronunciations. Let's see. Canabaudes. He kills King Canabaudes in battle, completely disperses the Gothic tribes, and he makes the rather safe but incorrect assumption that the Goths are done. They're gone in history. Um, and he assumes the title of Gothicus Maximus. to one up Claudius before him. His next move is a little confusing to some people. It's very frustrating to us Aurelian fans, but it makes a lot of sense. He just spent the first 2 years of his reign fighting campaign after campaign against competent enemies. He was just better than them. And marching through uh, all that diverse terrain, let alone the battles, took a really big toll on the Imperial army. And he decided that he didn't have the manpower or the resources on the Danube to effectively hold Dacia, which was always a troublesome area for the Romans. Um, so he gives up Dacia, which was unfortunately Trajan's one of his biggest accomplishments. He pulls back, and that gives the surviving Goths enough breathing room to reestablish themselves in Dacia, and they end up really gaining hegemony over both sides of the Carpathian Mountains. And this causes another wave of uh, locally cataclysmic migration of the Carpic tribes that these Goths then displaced. So then he has to deal with that as well as the German tribes to the north and to the west. Around this time for the Goths, the Gepids arrive, and the conflict that the Goths fight with the Gepids, even though it wasn't realized at the time, we can now look back and see this is really the moment when the Goths separate between the West Goths and the East Goths, as we'll call them from now on, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. The Vessi and Tervingi were the primary tribe that became the Visigoths, and the Gratungi were the primary tribe of the Ostrogoths. And by the 290s, Aurelian has pacified the Vandals and the Goths, and he forms an official foedus with both of them. And you will now see from this point on Vandal cavalry making a conspicuous appearance in many Roman campaigns, as well as Gothic soldiers in the Roman legions themselves, and also in independent Gothic federate units in their wars. And the Goths honored this treaty until 323 AD. So for a solid 33 years, Aurelian has solved the problem of the Vandals and the Goths on the Danube. That brings us to Constantine.
Just a
Constantine,
note, had
yes,
Aurelian lived longer because he's suddenly assassinated due to a communication
yes.
error, because certain senators thought he was going to get rid of them, he wasn't, and they panicked, tricked some of his own troops into murdering him. It was a communication error, ironically, not Aurelian's fault at all.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's the trouble of miscommunication when you don't give the person, the time to explain themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, had he lived longer, he likely would have seen the problems with his Gothic Vandal policy and would have
Mm-hmm.
corrected it. So, like, he's a man who, when he saw an error in his policy, like, start to blow up a little, he'd go there himself and, like, pop the balloon.
Mm-hmm.
He would solve it himself. But the tragedy is, he didn't live longer. And thus, the Goths and Vandals did become a problem. Had he lived, they
Mm-hmm.
would not have been. And I know a lot of
Well,
say, no,
clearly,
no, you can't
clearly
play
they
what if.
respected him enough.
Yeah, what if you can't play what if like that in history? Yes, you can to an extent. We
Mm-hmm.
can locate who could have solved the problems, and that's Aurelian. No other emperor could have solved the problems of this era. When I say that, no other emperor, I mean like no other emperor after him. Before him,
Mm-hmm.
in my view, like there's others like Augustus, Caesar, Vespasianus, Trajanus, Hadrianus, Marcus Aurelius. They could have solved the problem. Yes, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like everyone after Aurelian couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Aetius would have known how, but the problem is Aetius had no resources whatsoever. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not a, it's a different
No,
situation.
No, Rome is spent by the time of Aetius.
Yep.
So we get to Constantine. The empire's left to two lesser men. As much as I like Constantine being a Catholic, he is a saint. Constantine and Licinius are nothing compared to their predecessors. And we think of the Roman Empire by this point being the East Empire and the West Empire, when they would have considered it just the Roman Empire, with co regents. So we can't think of Constantine as the Eastern Emperor and Licinius as the Western Emperor. They would never have thought of it that way. They both had their zones of control. They're often overlapping and confusing, and that's what leads to their conflict with each other. Um, and the Danube is split between Licinius and Constantine again, challenging the notion that there are east and west. The line is split very far in the east on the eastern frontier in Europe on the Danube. Um, and because of the split, because these co-regions do not like each other and they actively consider each other their rival, this again weakens their border with the Goths, and the Goths take advantage of this. However, this is where we could get a little conspiratorial. The Goths raid across into Licinius's territory. I find that a little fishy, considering that they had backed him previous to this. Um, and Licinius doesn't really mount a defense against them. So Constantine takes it upon himself to go into Licinius's territory and fight them himself. And this violates the agreement Constantine had with Licinius. Now Licinius has an excuse to fight with Constantine. Um, but Constantine, like his predecessor, does some punitive expeditions across the Danube, not to the same scale, but they're still successful. Um, and this is when Licinius launches his attacks on Constantine, again, backed by the Goths. Um, but they end up losing. Um, and Constantine becomes the sole emperor in 324. And after that, he builds the first, I believe, stone bridge across the Danube. And this opens up a trade with the Goths that the Goths would then rely on for survival after this point. They were already trading heavily with the Romans, but this opening of the Danube by Constantine has really made them reliant for survival on the Romans. And he signs a new FOTUS with the Goths. The Now he's not only demanding manpower for the armies, he's also taking tribute from the Goths for the reason of Roman trade. So he's leveraging this trade. So he gets them reliant on Roman trade and then makes them pay for it afterwards. So a pretty good move by Constantine to keep these Goths in check for the time being. Um, and then it is around this time where the Bishop Ulfius, who was a Goth, an Arian Christian, is made bishop to the Goths, and he travels back up to uh, from the Roman Empire back up into Gothic territories on the Pontic Steppe and begins evangelizing. And it's slow going at first. It takes hold in some tribes, but not in others. But once the ball gets rolling, it is a very quick process. He he creates the Gothic alphabet and then translates the Bible into the new Gothic alphabet. Um, I think this is a big factor in why we can look at the Goths being about 800 years civilizationally ahead of their Norse kin that they left in Scandinavia, because they had contact with Christianity, and that
Hmm.
Christianity made them literate.
And
Um,
but here's the thing. Wait, not in Latin. So
no.
Constantine was really a Protestant. I'm joking. I'm joking. Couldn't resist that joke.
Yes, yes, he was.
No,
Um,
there's not even the
so
concept of such things at this time.
no, it's just when Ulfius is evangelizing the Goths, he's an Arian Christian, and Arianism became one of the greatest heresies of the faith. At the time, it wasn't considered a heresy; it was just considered an alternative point of view. We as Catholics consider it absurd now, but you got to think at this time,
Well,
it's
to
it
be
hasn't
fair,
been
it
all
was
hashed
absurd.
out. It is absurd. I agree. I agree. It is absurd. But this Arian Christianity, when it takes hold, the Goths hold on to it much more firmly than they ever did their Germanic paganism.
Hmm.
They're very quick to assimilate out of their paganism, and
Yep.
when they adopt this Arian Christianity, it becomes synonymous with being a Goth, even with being a German,
Mhm.
because the
Just
Vandals and the other Germans take up Arian
just
Christianity.
just as Gaul slash Francia would be utterly associated with Catholicism.
Yes, with Nicene Christianity.
Hmm.
And it wouldn't be until the 500s when the Visigothic Kingdom of Spain would officially convert to Nicene Christianity. So we've still got another solid 200 years of this Arian uh, Christian identity intrinsically tied to the Gothic and German ethnicity. Um, so now we'll move on to the Emperor Valens, who I don't think was an incompetent emperor. He fell into a bad spot and um, really was an unfortunate um, product of his time, I guess you could say. So he his entire reign, he's trying to so Valen's entire reign, he's trying to go to war with the Persians, and it's making him ignore the Gothic unrest that is always simmering below the surface. And it's at this time when the Huns make their appearance on the European scene, and they, in a big way, which is still an understatement, force the Goths wholesale to the banks of the Danube. And Valens comes up with a pretty good idea of only allowing a couple tribes across. He selects these tribes, he allows them to come across, but the Roman military is stretched pretty thin at this point, as it had been for about 50 years at this point. So when the Roman navy on the Danube has to consolidate around these crossing points of these Goths, it allows the rest of the Goths on the Danube to cross over because it's now unpatrolled. And this leads to a huge crisis on to the west of the Danube for the Romans, because they now have way more Goths than they were intending, and they don't have the supplies to sustain such a population in that area. This leads to mass starvation amongst the Goths, and it's said that the prices of food got so bad that the Goths were reduced to selling their children into slavery just to afford some bread. Uh,
Yes, and recent historians
yeah,
have blamed that on the Romans, saying it
yeah.
was Roman administrative incompetency.
There's
But
there was probably some of that, but like I said, Valens only approved. I think it was two tribes to come over, and with those two tribes, several other rushed over at the same time.
yeah, and the other problem is that it was not Roman duplicity and greed and incompetency, so much as you got to bear in mind the Romans are also having a rough time with food and
Hmm.
whatnot in the same era. So this is across the board. It's not just
Yeah,
the Goths. Um, and the dog meat was probably the only thing that the Romans could offer because they're not exactly fat right now.
yeah.
And on top of that, we also have to bear in mind um, Romans traditionally were very attached to their dogs,
Hmm.
and they were dog lovers. So I consider it a horror to consider eating dog meat.
Yeah. Yeah, me
Um,
too.
so, but I'm of a mindset dogs synonymous with children. So, um, on the same caliber of love and whatnot. So I'm very
Hmm.
much like that. And I have been told by some natalist obsessed people, that's a problem. You need to remove that mindset. We need more kids. We don't need more dogs. No, 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 nonsense, nonsense. We need both more kids and more dogs.
Hmm.
Um, because dogs are also protectors and babysitters. What we need are less TVs, more dogs.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Smash your
You push
TV because it's just a magic box that distracts,
sucks your
people.
soul.
Yeah. While a dog will cherish your child, will protect it, and will play with your child.
Hmm.
It will teach your child good values and good morals. So yeah. So now I've analyzed the problem with the baby boomer generation. They didn't have enough dogs growing up. I'm joking. I'm joking. I couldn't resist that joke. I'm not going to be bashing any boomers because I don't see the point.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
I
beating a
just have
dead
to crack
horse.
jokes at the whole meme war between the
Yeah,
generations.
yeah. Which we're winning.
Yeah, only because we're outliving everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're just 50 years younger than them.
Yeah,
Um,
poor guys.
yeah, yeah. They're
But
fine.
age
They're
comes
okay.
for all of us.
Hmm. So these Goths end up going into full-scale revolt, and Valens is still eyeing the Persians, and because of this, he's pretty slow to respond. And once he's able to get onto the scene, he tries to rush it. It's usually attributed to him wanting the glory over his nephew Gratian, who is his co-emperor coming from the west to help him. Uh, that's probably part of it because Romans are famously glory seekers. But he also just wants to get this problem, solved. He wants to get this over with so he can, really focus on what he considers the main threat being the Persians. And I'll take a short time to go over the differences in equipment between the Romans and the Goths. Part of the deal with Valens when the Goths crossed the Danube was that they would disarm. The Goths, as Joe said before, were more advanced in culture than they were in war. They had some of the best metallurgy in all of Europe at the time. They had amazing gold, silver, metal artwork, as well as extremely high quality weapons. They were known for carrying a longsword. Now, this is not like the medieval two-handed longsword. The longsword in this period means longer than a gladius. So they had a long one-handed sword, and so this is the stereotypical Goth: a long one-handed sword, a short sax, which would be a symbol of the Germanic warrior from this period on through the Viking Age, and then a shield or armor. That's due to a couple factors. One being metal armor is extremely expensive, so just the average levied Goth would not be. And also, the Germans seem to always be of the mindset that there's something a little cowardly about armor. I think that's some cope, maybe from the time, or maybe from us modern viewers on the topic. Um,
It
but
is a
they
cope.
almost always had large shields. It's a cope. So, uh, in contrast, you had the Romans who had weapons factories. They had uh, full armaments per in each locality. So even their militia units would still have at least a helmet, a spear, a good shield, possibly some armor. Uh, they're going to be better equipped than their Gothic counterpart. So, because the Goths had to disarm when they crossed the Danube, many of them are now armed with clubs. They're using wooden clubs and lesser quality shields than they would have had otherwise when they came across. And then, of course, any weapons that they could loot from the armaments or from small parties that they defeated. So, when Valens comes up into the Balkans to meet this Gothic revolt. He finds the Goths in a fortified wagon camp. He received um, pretty bad intelligence, possibly intentionally false intelligence, that the Goths numbered 10,000 or less when his own army was 20 to 30,000. But it's estimated now that the Gothic army was probably comparable in size to his own. Uh, so for that reason, he thought there's no reason to wait for Gratian. I've got all the numbers. I've got the quality of troops. My men aren't starving like the Goths are. Uh, but he does put them to a forced march, so they are exhausted by the time they get to the battle. And he gets to the fortified camp, which is outside of the city of Adrianople, which is where a large part of the empire's treasury is held. And he marches up to this very large wagon fort, and he decides to uh, display his army, array his army in front of the Goths, and try to get them to negotiate. Sign a FOTUS deal like Constantine did with them. Uh, but his troops are also very impatient, just like he is. And on the flanks, on the right and the left, they begin to have skirmishes with these Goths, and this snowballs into the Roman army attacking the Gothic wagon camp. These wagons would have offered a very substantial defensive line that would largely make up for um, their deficiency in equipment. And the Romans were also not aware that the Gothic cavalry was out on a foraging expedition when they met them, and were coincidentally on their way back as the Roman army arrayed itself in front of the wagon fort. So, as they're engaged on the flanks, the Gothic cavalry comes in, takes the initiative, and surprises one Roman flank and routs it. Then, and this is where Gothic cavalry really gets its reputation. In a very impressive way, they're able to reorganize, go around the Romans, and hit the other flank, and they rout that flank. And this puts the entire Roman army into retreat. You're now in the classic situation of fleeing infantry getting run down by cavalry. Even if this cavalry is lower quality compared to the Romans' own cavalry, once they're in flight, it's all over. The army's routed, herd mentality has set in, everyone's running, the Gothic cavalry's running them down. It is here where the Emperor Valens probably died in the rout, cut down by cavalry indiscriminately. It's also said in one account that he was killed by an arrow in the fighting, which is a pretty stereotypical way for a leader to go out in an ancient or medieval battle. And then the most exciting account of his death is that he survives the battle with his entourage, and he holds up in a house, and the Goths surround the house and burn him and his entourage alive. But anyway, Valens dies. And this is known as one of the great turning points, like the loudest death nail of the Roman Empire was the Battle of Adrianople. Uh, I don't really see it that way. It is definitely a big deal because it establishes the Goths as the major player in the region afterwards. But the Romans recover pretty well from this.
And it must be
So,
emphasized as
yes,
well,
please, Joe.
modern academia takes too much time in reveling over Adrianople. I've had two
I agree.
professors in my undergraduate years who gleefully told the story of Adrianople, and it always made my teeth kind of grind
It's it's
because,
it's a it's a weird thing to idolize.
well, they were both. One was of wow, they were both Anglophones in Canada, and they both
Hmm.
were very gleeful over the Roman defeat. And it's something I noticed also in a few English professors I'd met, oddly, but the French tend to not really like the battle. but
Hmm.
it represents a difference in attitude because the French associate with the Roman Empire, and for some reason my Anglophone and English professors associated more with, for some reason, the Goths rather than the
Well,
Romans.
we're both Germanic peoples, so
Yeah,
it's a loose connection, but there is a connection.
but the trouble is, um, they also look at the Goths as embodying diversity and nonsense like that. Whereas,
Okay.
but because the Romans were still homogenous, really, they were, yes, a semi pan European people, including a lot of Celts from the West and
Hmm.
Greeks from the East. But it's not a decisive thing that, it's not the final death nail. That doesn't come till probably the reign of Ricimer. But
Hmm.
the thing is, Adrianople is important, but it's just not the be all end
It's
all.
it's it's not the decisive moment that it's made out to be.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll emphasize to listeners, please don't overemphasize with the Goths. It's boring. It's a boring way of looking at history. I like the Goths after the battle, but the battle itself, like, it's just I always found, why are you taking joy in the death of 30,000 Romans or something like that?
yeah,
It's so
yeah.
weird and perverse and sadistic. Um, it and no offense, it does bear comparison to, like, I've had what was it? I've met some people who took, for example, glee at the massacre of the French at Dunkirk. It was
Hmm.
such an odd thing to hear people, cheering about, and it's something that you shouldn't do, because this is a lot of people, fathers, sons, brothers, whatnot. I'm not trying to be moralistic. It's just, but the Romans, you know, the Roman massacre, the massacre of Romans is never a good thing in history, because the Romans were the light of civilization at the time. They were important. Damn it. Anyways, do carry on.
So that moves us. We're going to jump a little ahead, and then, or we'll jump a little back, and then we'll come back up to Adrianople. So this brings us to Theodosius. He is known as the last emperor of a unified Rome, but he was not born into a family that you would assume would raise a son to be an emperor. He grew up on campaign with his father, who was a very accomplished general in the Western Roman Empire, and he goes on campaign. He pretty much grew up on campaign with him, and when he gets a little older, his father ends up getting executed, which was a pretty common problem by this point in Roman history. They seem to distrust military leaders who have too much success because they assume they're gunning for the top spot. So they just take them out. Um, Even though Theodosius was successful, he defeats the Sarmatians, which is a big deal. They're like the classic Scythian steppe nomads that were forced into the Roman Empire by the Goths. He defeats the Sarmatians. He has the position of Magister Militum in Mosia, which is uh, in the east. But when his father is executed, he decides, I don't want that to happen to me either. And he retires from his position and moves back to his estate in Spain. And it is during this time that the Battle of Adrianople happens. The Emperor Valens is killed in battle, and his co-regent Gratian recalls Theodosius to the generalship. He ends up defeating the Sarmatians again, and in 379 he's made co-emperor by Gratian. Uh, this is where and why I consider the Battle of Adrianople to not be as decisive as a lot of other people do, because when Theodosius goes over to the east, he ends up federating these Goths that killed the emperor and repacifies them once again. Um, Forces them. Force is a strong word. Uh, Pays them to be in the Roman army. Settles them on land that had been abandoned because of raids. There have been plagues that moved through multiple times in this period. So he's now getting this land cultivated again, and he's exacting tribute from them. He allows the Goths to maintain autonomous control of their internal affairs. And interestingly, this is really what the Goths had been looking for since the Huns pushed them out of the Pontic steppe. They were looking to become an agrarian society again. So Theodosius, by giving them the Federate Agreement, pretty much gave them what they wanted, and he profited from it. He's now hiring Goths into the Roman army, which was suffering very bad manpower issues at this point, and is now being able to tax these areas that were previously abandoned. He signs this FOTUS in 381 with King Athanaric of the Visigoths, and and settles them in the Lower Danube. He then has to deal with two civil wars. One against the guy who usurps Emperor Gratian in the West, a guy named Maximus. He takes his army, Goths and Romans included, back west, defeats Maximus, and installs Emperor Valentinian II on the Western throne. This is not the same agreement that previous co-regents had, like Constantine and Licinius had. Theodosius was the Roman emperor, and in name, Valentinian was a co-regent, but in no way did he have equal power to Theodosius. He is the emperor. Valentinian II is just like the manager of the Western territories. Um, and then in 391, he outlaws pagan sacrifices in the temples. He was a staunch Nicene Christian. He was a great persecutor of the pagans. And at this point, even though a lot of the Roman population was Christian, much of the old aristocracy was still pagan. So when he outlawed these pagan sacrifices, the aristocracy started to get uppity and they rebelled against him in the West. Um, and this is in 394. These pagans elevate Eugenius up to, they call him emperor. He was attempting to usurp like Maximus was. And Theodosius amasses a very large army. He's got, a Roman army plus 10,000 Visigoths with him. 10,000 is a pretty big size at this time, even though it wouldn't have been a few hundred years before. So adding that force onto your army makes this massive. This is a big army that he's taking west, and he meets the pagan forces of Eugenius at the Battle of the Frigidus River. This is a very interesting encounter because it doesn't have subtle maneuvers. It doesn't have the cavalry flanking from a foraging party and skirmishes before. They come together, uh, and the pagan forces have a pretty strong defensive position on the river. And he uses his Theodosius uses his Gothic forces in a pretty brutal way. He sends them in as the pawn sacrifice, and the Goths, being the Goths, go in. They deal a ton of damage to the pagan forces, but they also suffer extremely heavy losses themselves. And in this battle is, if not the first, one of the first mentions of Alaric, who will eventually become king of the Visigoths. So he is in this action, and he is one of the Goths that survive and retreat. The next day, Theodosius advances with his Roman army, and it is said that he was praying for um, a storm or heavy winds to come in and disrupt the pagan lines, and and that's what happened. There were extremely heavy winds blowing into the pagans, and it kicked up so much dirt, and the gusts were so strong that it actually disorganized and broke apart their battle lines. So when the Christian forces marched on them, they were in complete disarray by the time battle was met, and they were defeated. And Eugenius was he committed suicide in a very pagan way. All is lost. You don't surrender. You commit suicide. That is what he does. Also at this battle, and taking a minor part like Alaric, was Stilicho, who would, after Theodosius, would go on to be the dominant force in the West in his lifetime. And it is here that we have finally come to the previously agreed upon topic, and I will pass it on to Joe to pick it up with Stilicho and Aetius.
Okay, there. I finally unmuted my mic. Took me a full minute. Okay, so now Stilicho is someone who, if memory serves, is half Vandal.
Yes, he's a vandal.
So keep him away from your nightstand, your tables, and whatnot. I'm joking. But he's someone who is favored by Theodosius, and he's someone who kind of comes from nothing. But he might be a half Vandal, but he's very much all Roman, like culturally,
Yes.
mentally, and in how he looks at things. He's just simply kind of treated like a half breed by the Romans when they should not have done that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a stupid mistake to do so. Now, he is someone who would. He was born in the year of our Lord 359 to a Vandal father and a Roman mother. He would rise through the ranks, as mentioned, but you just went through a bit of his military career, but he was also married to Theodosius's niece, an adopted
Yes.
daughter, which integrated him into the imperial family. So Theodosius very much had him in mind as a member of the family, as someone that he was earmarking for greatness. And he made him commander in chief. Likely, had Theodosius not had any sons, it would have been Stilicho who would have been emperor. But the trouble is, he's instead appointed Parens, guardian of the young Honorius in the west. And the thing is, this would cause some problems. And the trouble is, which, the world just said it's the Roman Empire and regarded as one. But we're starting to see the division of East and West. Rivalries between emperors is becoming ever greater, and it's getting harder and harder to bring it together. So you have also Stilicho would face massive problems, not just civilly, but also, I'm going to say kind of externally. When I say externally, I mean the Goths. Because you have the Visigothic invasions of Alaric in the Balkans and Italy. You have, now Alaric would arrive and would be campaigned against very effectively by Stilicho from the year 395 of our Lord to 397. Stilicho would repel an Ostrogothic invasion in 406. He would crush the invasion of Radagez in 406 to 407, and he would execute the Gothic leader, incorporate many of the Goths into Roman service. Now, he was clearly trying to federize more and more barbarians to compensate for a lack of manpower and resources in the West. But the thing is, he has less and less resources, and he's got to be everywhere because, he's the only man who's competent. And he's also weakened by the fact that he's very devoted to his emperor. Um, and I say this is a weakness because the thing is, had he had ambition, Stilicho could have taken the throne and solved the problems. But he's not ambitious. He's not. And that's the problem. He's devoted to Honorius because he helped raise Honorius. So he kind of thinks of him as his boy in a way. And he seems to have genuinely loved Theodosius. So this causes him to overlook negative influences at court over Honorius. Now, Honorius is, to use a modern term, retarded. Not like
Yes.
he's, well, okay. He's under the good Saint Fisto's logic of retarded. That is to say, he's stupid. So Honorius prefers to listen to Olympius, a really, really dumb eunuch who, yeah, you're listening to a eunuch. Why the would you ever do that? Historically, that's the question. Why would you ever do that? I've only seen one decent eunuch at his job in history. And I think it was Narses, who kind of takes Italy by storm and was a bit of a Chad that way. But there's questions whether Narses was really a eunuch.
If eunuch was just like a court title at this point, or if it still referred to the physical nature of the individual.
Because there's a rumor throughout history that someone botched the operation on Narses so that he actually still had his balls and whatnot. Yeah. He only had a scar on his leg. So there's questions because he may have fathered children. There's questions, which is a little funny. That Narses would say, I'm a eunuch. Well, not really. Yeah, okay. Are you really or are you not? This is a whole gender question. Are you a woman or not? I'm joking. I'm joking.
Here's ahead of the curve.
Yeah. But he was a bit of a macho man himself. Like
he was.
But to get Olympius was not a botched eunuch. He was a eunuch. And you don't listen to that sort. They're always very, very debauched and unpleasant individuals and effeminate. They're also they're effeminate in that they're resentful of other men and use toxic feminine techniques to get rid of them. They don't even have the positives, virtues of women. So they have all the negatives of men and women wrapped up into one. So that Olympius is jealous of Stilicho and starts whispering in Honorius's ear. Now, Honorius is not a eunuch, but he might as well be one for all the good he is. He's also a bit of a loser, as I like to call him. He's the first NEET in history. I'm joking. In a way, because he doesn't really go out. He doesn't really do anything. And it's just like, really? You're emperor. But the thing is, he grew up with Stilicho as basically his dad, and Stilicho's just doing everything, overachieving. And of course, Stilicho's like a dad of a drug-addled kid who's like, he'll get over it. He'll get over it. I just need to love him more. He'll eventually, my love will heal him of his problems. So you have here a toxic mix, except they're in charge of the Western Empire. So Olympius is whispering in Honorius's ears. And Honorius will eventually decide to get rid of Stilicho and start killing his supporters. Stilicho would submit to arrest to avoid civil war. Now, he'd be promised he'd be spared, only to be, it was decided he'd be executed on August 22nd of 408. His son, Eucharius was later killed, and his wife, Serena, faced hostility, which is absolutely horrific that they got rid of his bloodline. Um, the immediate aftermath was, of course, catastrophic,
Hmm.
as it resulted in the massacre of many barbarian families in Italy. Now, when we say barbarian families, uh, mixed barbarian Roman families as well. And the thing is, these mixed families were a net positive at this time for
Hmm.
Rome because it was helping to integrate. And a lot of the barbarians who would see their wives or their sons marry into Roman families would say, "Well, I can't rebel against Rome because I have I have family that's Roman." But in turn, you had Romans kind of they didn't really like the barbarians, but they had to stomach them because, well, my cousin is married to one. But now that link is severed. So Honorius blows the entire thing out into the open. And of course, Alaric then proceeds to rebel. Now, he was checked by Stilicho, and he then spends 2 years trying to negotiate with Honorius, only for Honorius to not give a flying. And then, of course, Alaric, against his wishes, does a light sack. We have to emphasize a light sack of Rome. This is not like, okay, I really like Rebel Giscard of the Normans, but he freaking melts a chunk of Rome
Hmm.
down. Alaric was not trying to melt Rome, so like he only does a slight sack. He sacks a portion of it, and then withdraws with the wealth because he's not trying to break Rome. Alaric still he wants to be part of Rome. Really, at his core, he wants to be part of it. So he doesn't
And Rome
like.
wasn't Rome wasn't the capital at this point either.
It was
It,
Ravenna.
re- yeah, it was Alaric's sack of Rome was like you're not listening to me. Can you please listen to me? Look at what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna hit Rome. Are you gonna listen to me now? Is
Yeah,
really what it was about. He
yeah,
wasn't trying to usurp Honorius. He was just trying to get him to listen to him.
yeah. And Honorius tried to ambush him, tried to assassinate him like he did Stilicho. Alaric nearly fell for it a few times, kept
Yep.
getting rescued. And the thing is, he was just trying to say, "Hey, listen to me. Come on, give me a job, hire me, give me a job interview." Like that's literally what he's doing. But Honorius doesn't want to listen. Honorius is sealed up in the palace in Ravenna. And the thing is, Rome at this point is unimportant.
Hmm.
So, he sacks Rome, the symbolic capital of the world. Now, the thing is, of course, this would be traumatic for those who love Rome, like St. Augustine. St. Augustine would react with horror and say, the mother of the world has been raped. And
Hmm.
he was right. Rome had been mother to the world, and she had been violated. But I would argue it was Honorius that violated her. And when Honorius would hear of the sack, he'd burst into tears because he had a chicken called Rome. And he would, of course, so the story goes, burst into tears, then be reassured, no, no, your chicken's alive. It's the city that's been sacked, you fucking idiot. And he, oh, that's okay then. Oh, phew, I lost my pet.
Yeah.
This is how detached from reality he was. And I do think it's Stilicho's fault. He should have brought the son on campaign. But he loved him too much and thought, I have to protect him. No, 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 no. Your job was to prepare him, not protect him.
Hmm.
There's a difference. You protect a daughter and you prepare a son. That's how it goes here. You know what I mean? Like, you don't expose your daughter to war or to violence, but you must expose your son to these things, to the hardships, so that it'll make him into the man he should be.
Hmm.
What Rome needed was another Theodosius, not Honorius. But ultimately, yeah. Um, Now, the intervening years between uh, the fall of Stilicho and uh, the rise of Aetius, the last of the Romans, um, would see just everything just start falling apart. Everything would collapse. You'd have Constantine III usurping in Gaul and Britain. You'd have the settlement of barbarian groups, uh, not as federated allies, or I should say troops of Rome, but as semi independent kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you would see uh, Ravenna becoming increasingly more important as a capital, and Rome declining in importance. Africa all but being, you know, cut off due to the Vandals taking it under Gaiseric. Um, and that would happen in the year 429 as the Vandals would cross from Spain and capture Carthage, which was still an important city in Roman Africa, and
Mm-hmm.
they would capture Carthage in the year 439. Which, think about that. Um, the the Roman capital of Africa is lost. That is horrible. It was a breadbasket, and arguably, Africa has not recovered since then. Like Northern Africa has not recovered since that time. That's how bad that was. And and because of that, food became harder to get a hold of for Rome. So Aetius, um, when he's coming up, all he has are problems. Now, I don't like Game of Thrones, but one line I do like is that I forget which character it was who said, "Chaos can be a ladder for some men to climb," and it can be. And the thing is, it is a ladder that Aetius does climb, but he climbs it. Now, um, a lot of modern historians say he climbed it out of greed. No, 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 no. He climbed it out of patriotism because he truly did love Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And because, like, if it was just greed, he'd have gone over to the barbarians and just helped, like, smash Rome. Because,
Yeah.
there was more profit to be gained from that. Who the hell would ever attach their banner to Rome when she's collapsing? Or you go over to the Eastern Empire, which is still solid. You don't
Yep.
tie your banner and fortunes to the Western Empire. It's gone. It's done. But Aetius refuses to give up. He's like a man trying to save a drowning person. He's just refusing to give up. He's noble. He's heroic. And Flavius Aetius is someone who he was the son of a magister equitum, and he spent his youth, as a hostage among the Visigoths and Huns. And because of this, he gained a lot of insight into the barbarian mind.
Mm-hmm.
And he would initially support an usurper on the throne, but switched sides. He was pragmatic, but he would also use his Hunnic ties to secure influence uh, at court under the young Valentinian III, who was installed in Rome in 425 with Eastern Roman help. Now, Aetius would end up a rival of two other men, Felix and Boniface, um, and it would culminate in the death of Boniface at the Battle of Rimini in 432, at which point Aetius became the dominant Magister Militum, that is to say, Generalissimo. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
to the modern mind, I guess we could say Shogun. For some reason, Shogun is more well known than Magister Militum in the West. I don't know why. Well, okay, I partially know why. Japan is awesome. So, like everyone loves Japan. So,
Mm-hmm.
although
You
I would
know,
argue not the right reasons, we should love Japan for the samurai and the Heian Jidai's cultural beauty, not for anime.
yes, that's cringe.
Yeah. Oh, there's a funny thing. I know quite a few Japanese on Twitter and Japanese friends who say it's a shame the West loves us for our porn and not our culture.
Yeah.
And they, because
Yes,
they
that is a
call
shame.
anime and manga porn, and they're like,
Hmm.
a lot of them have tended to say that after Dragon Ball Z, anime became porn, and
Mm.
that anime died when Dragon Ball Z stopped airing in
Hmm.
'92 thereabouts. So they have a very funny perspective where they tend to say, we had some good anime like Yu-Gi-Oh or Escaflowne, but they say all else is porn and stuff. So they tend to take a very bitter outlook on cartoons and say the West loves us for our porn and not our culture. If only they would research our traditional culture, they would love us even more or love us
Yeah.
properly. So it's just a funny little thing with the Japanese. They don't like their own. A lot of them don't like their own pop culture, but they love their traditional culture. And when you visit, if you try to say I love your country because of anime, they find that cringe. Like you'll the Japanese themselves will cringe.
Yep.
Some of them do love anime. A lot of Japanese do love anime, but they like older stuff or more
Mm.
because the Japanese have high IQs, so they like the high IQ stuff, like Death Note, Yu-Gi-Oh. They like high IQ stuff, not the lower stuff.
Mm.
But if
I've
you
never
say I
watched
like,
anime.
yeah, if you say I like history, I like no Oda Nobunaga, I like Ashikaga Takauchi or Taiba no Kiyomori, they'll laugh, and they'll smile and they'll want to engage with you. That's been my experience. They love history and culture.
Good.
But anyways, so yeah, Aetius is the shogun basically. He has to be because now he takes the title of patrician to and consul multiple times to
Hmm.
cement his authority, but he has to because the thing is, um, Honorius is not interested in rule. He's just detached from reality and from the politics of the age as his predecessor was. So, no, wait, Valentinian the Third. I mean, not Honorius. So this is getting to be a problem for the Roman emperors. They are not wanting to engage with the reality of rule
Hmm.
because it's a risky, dirty job, and they're passing on the responsibility to these men who are loyal. But you know, but anyways, so you have here Aetius who is desperate for troops, and so he has to rally and tie himself to barbarian alliances and coalitions, playing one barbarian group against another. But this starts to fall apart a little when uh, Savage comes to the Hunnic throne,
Ah.
and I use the term very, very much with disdain. I
Yes.
do not like Attila the Hun.
No, me neither.
Attila comes to the throne, butchering siblings, cousins, the works. Um, Attila is, I've seen him compared to Chinggis Khan, but he's like someone who's LARPing at being what Chinggis would be. Um, Attila is brutal. He's the scourge of God, as he's called.
Hmm.
But he tries his hand at warring with the Eastern Empire, gets his butt whooped, and like,
Hmm.
those high walls. I can't take Constantinople. Welp, gonna go pick on the defenseless West. And of course, this is where I will actually criticize the Eastern Empire. It says, yes, do that. Not our problem. But here's the problem. If the West falls, the East will suffer. It's the problem of the emperors of the Eastern Empire being short sighted and not perceiving the problems of a collapse in the West. They're thinking more and more like they're Greeks. Oh, we're Greeks. We don't need the West. I mean, we were here first. Yes, but the Roman Empire always functioned best when it balanced out the strengths of the West with the strengths of the East. Eastern wealth to prop up Western military genius and strength,
Hmm.
and also to help further civilize the West. And in turn, the West would lend strength in military might and its numbers to bolster the East.
Yes.
That's going to be cut because the East decides, go for it, Attila. We don't care about the West. We don't care. So they refuse to help. And this is also a major problem for Aetius because when Attila comes to power, he's still trying to play his one barbarian group against another and trying to prop up Rome. But now he has the East, which is not wanting to help. It's no longer playing ball. And so the East has cut itself off from the Roman Empire, so to speak. I'm not saying it's not the Roman Empire. It is. But it's one that's cut itself off from Rome. So it's at this point, I would say we can call it the Greek Empire,
Yes.
in a way. Um, it cut the link first. And so now, on the other hand, it would survive for another 1,000 years. So, it does a good job surviving. But the West cannot survive without it. It's just the way it is.
Well,
And the
not in its
West,
current form.
no, not in its current form. It would have to be, as we commented the other day on Substack, transfigured
Yes.
in order to survive. But we'll get to that. Um, Aetius, who is one of my favorite figures in history, and honestly, I think should be used as a model of the honorable man. We actually need
Hmm.
to raise our sons to be like him. And we need to name our son Aetius because, like, come on, it's a great name.
It
Um,
is.
he would, despite the East cutting ties, despite him having relied on Hunnic help and now being cut off from that, and him not being on good terms with the Visigoths, and him not having access to Africa, and him only, well, having no support from the emperor or the court at Ravenna. And so he has almost literally no help. He would basically be told uh, by pretty much the Pope in Rome and, well, the Bishop of Rome at this time, but we'll call him Pope because counts. He is Pope. And by the Emperor, yeah, can you solve the Attila problem? Because Attila would get the brilliant idea, which, to be fair, it is brilliant. Now, Attila's not stupid.
No.
Well, he can be sometimes, but not always. Now, the thing is, Attila could have tried going under the Alps, like on the Roman side to get
Hmm.
to Gaul. But the problem is, because he knows Gaul is I'm going to say now, the richest part of the empire right now.
It's the most Roman part of the empire at this point.
Yeah. Now, he could try going through Italy, but that's going through hostile territory
Yep.
that will destroy him. But Attila's arrogant, so you might not assume he'd be destroyed, but he's like, it'd be harder to do it that way. I'm going to go around the Alps on the German side, which the strange thing is he encounters no resistance from the German
Mhm.
tribes on the way. I have the suspicion some of them even join his band of
Oh,
merry men.
they did. They did.
Okay,
He had several German tribes with him when he
all
met
right.
with Aetius
I
and the
wasn't sure.
Visigoths. Yep.
I wasn't sure.
Uh, keep talking. I've actually got my article on this pulled up. Um,
So
yeah, go ahead.
so he had German help. So it was a German Hunnic coalition, and it's a massive force. Let me just. I have some notes. Let me pull them up. Um, Laisse-moi voir. La bataille catalonique. Um, Let me see. Where are you? I'm having a hard time. Um, Let me see. All right. Um, I can't seem to. You know what?
So
1 second.
Attila had the Ostrogoths, the Rugi, the Skiri, the Thuringi, the East Franks, the Gepids, who clashed with the West Franks to open the coming battle, the Burgundians, and the Heruli. Um, with the Western Romans, you had the Visigoths, of course, the West Franks, the Ripuarian Franks, other Burgundians, Saxons, Amoricans, Alans, which is very interesting because they started far in the east, like the Goths did, and were pushed all the way into Gaul. Um, and the Allobrones. So you had these two opposing coalitions of the Huns and the Western Romans at the head, and then several German tribes on both sides.
All right, I just found some notes. All right, so Jordanes gives the number um, in his Getica, I think it is, um,
Hmm.
that the that Attila's army numbered around 500,000 men, which might be too much.
It's too much. The
Yeah,
land would not have supported an army that big.
no,
Um, we
no,
can
it's
assume that all of his tribes combined, like the total tribal population following him, could have been about that big. The
but
army
no,
was not that big.
no. The army was apparently closer to probably a little over 100,000.
Hmm.
He probably only had now he had about 100,000 men. So I'm going to actually say I'm pretty sure that was his number. Um, his coalition was over 100,000. But now most historians will say no, it has to be below that, 70,000. Given the size of this thing and how it didn't move as all that quickly, and it hammered at several cities all at once, like Paris and whatnot, which we'll get to in a minute.
Hmm.
This thing was huge, and we have to bear in mind there were men on the Roman side who said, "There's no way we can win this."
Yep.
Like people had no faith. But here's the thing: Aetius. Now we also have to bear in mind this army was so massive, it scared all the tribes in Gaul, like all the Frank, all the Goths. It scared everyone. So it has to be
Hmm.
massive. So it can't be 500,000, but it can't be like anything smaller than like 80,000. I would give the estimate of 100 to 120,000 thereabouts.
Hmm.
That's absolutely horrifically huge, even by
Yep.
today's standards. That's huge. I don't think Attila, like, I think Attila may have left with maybe 70,000, but no, he just gathered troops as he went. You know what I mean? Like, gathered Germans as he went.
Hmm.
And it's just more and more boys came to join him, so to speak. It was him and the lads when they arrived. I'm joking. But when they arrived, they were bigger than they left, which sometimes that happened.
Hmm.
And the trouble is, the people in Gaul kind of looked at this and went, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. We have to bear in mind, Attila was cruel. He loved genociding entire people, he loved slaughter.
Hmm.
He was truly a savage. And the trouble is, his evil would be his undoing. Because in the city of Paris, there was a young woman by the name of Genevieve who would convince the people not to surrender, reminding them that, you know, if you surrender, he's just going to, if you have, we have, we have walls. We just need to man the walls. And she then, there's something strange about the story. She then said, and God has spoken to me and told me he wants us to man the walls. And if I have to, I will man them myself.
Hmm.
And, you know, she's a bit of a pre Jeanne d'Arc figure,
Yeah.
you know, rallying the city and telling them, please, you know, your wives, your daughters, you've seen me grow up. You know, I've lived here my entire life. We will all be violated and you will be put to the sword, and then we'll be put to the sword. There are babies thrown from the walls. Do not force down on us. Do not surrender. You know, she rallies the men of Paris, which is phenomenal. I think it's Paris. Um, Let me just double check. Um, let's see. Uh, Let me just. Yes, it is Paris. And she was a consecrated virgin, apparently. And she was kind of
Hmm.
attached to her virginity, which you could blame her given the options. Um, but the thing is, the Huns arrive at the walls Hammer, 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 achieve nothing. But the army is still so big that the front, who are kind of hostile to Rome and want more and more stuff from Rome, are quick to agree to Aetius's alliance. Now, Aetius sent dispatches to say, join me. He makes peace with the Visigoths because, he's had a personal feud with one of their kings.
Mhm.
And so, he's the thing is he's got a personal feud with the king, Theoderic.
Theodoric.
Okay, Theoderic. Sorry, so it's Theodoric in
I say
English.
Theodoric.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'll just. It's easier for me, Theoderic. Um, just how I was raised.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's sometimes a struggle. Um, Theoderic and him have a bit of a personal rivalry, I guess you could say. But Aegis says, "Screw that." Let's, because
Mhm.
if we lose, you'll lose. Let's join
Mhm.
forces. So all these Gothic factions are joined together. The front are welcomed in, and we have to bear in mind the front are going to be in the front to a large extent in some of these battles because in the Great Battle of La Bataille de Plaine Catalonique, because they're some of the top fighters in
Mhm.
the empire. You need their cavalry. You need their javelin throwers in the front. Now, you also need the Goths in front because there's some good good fighters right now, and as many Romans as can be gathered are brought in. As many barbarians are brought in from all throughout the Western Empire, just pulled into this grand coalition. Which the numbers. Now the thing is, back in the time of Augustus, the empire had been able to field, what was it, 100,000 men in under a
Mhm.
year.
Yep.
Even 60,000 men, just like that. Aetius spends months just pulling men together, only gathers 30,000. That's it. That's
Mhm.
all he can pull together. And that's actually the high ball number. Now, some historians like to say he gathered more. No, he could not gather more than possibly 30, 15 to 30,000. I've seen some historians say perhaps it might have only been 15,000. It's possible it may have only been between 15 and 20,000, which
Mhm.
that Aetius has to take this army, this coalition of these different barbarian groups that can't even speak the same language, and throw them at this humongous Hunnic army is just mind blowing. Like, there's a reason, you know. Now, I have the theory that maybe the numbers started at 30,000 or so, but there were desertions because, there's no way we can fight Attila, who up until this point has been the most successful warlord and military guy, around. Attila has been winning and winning and winning and has almost never lost. I don't think he ever lost up until this point. So Aetius is basically told, you have, you know, this coalition, you have to take it and fight that. Not since the time of Scipio Africanus has a Roman general been given so little and expected to do so much. And Scipio Africanus, if you'll bear in mind, had to use disgraced legions and raw recruits to fight against the most experienced army in the Punic Wars, Hannibal Barca at the fields of Zama. And Scipio scored a victory against all odds and did so easily, weirdly enough. Just completely trounced Hannibal like he was a red-headed stepchild, as one of my Irish friends would call it. And the interesting thing is with Aetius is he's taking something even worse than raw recruits and disgraced legions. He has no legions, or only like maybe one, like a teeny tiny little thing, with a bunch of barbarian guys who don't like communication is everything, and they can't communicate. Resources is everything. They have no resources. Like you can barely feed this barbarian army, and you certainly can't have it plundering the countryside because that's your countryside. So he's having to move this thing. And what's interesting is that all the chieftains, all the barbarian kings are willing to cooperate. Never in the history of Rome have they been so cooperative because they understand they're up against something they unspeakably evil that they cannot reason with. So now Attila on his end, realizing that the siege of Paris is just utterly futile. It's utterly futile. There's no point. Turns south to go and confront this army he's hearing of. What's likely is that the rumors blew the army out of proportion. And so, he's arriving thinking it's going to be much larger, then arrives realizing, oh, they're tiny compared to my force. Cool. And Attila goes into the battle very arrogant. And now I've done one live about La Bataille de Plaine Catalonique, and I love this battle. It's one of my favorite battles in history, as Maverick well knows. I love this fight. But having looked at the numbers, oh, tabarnak. That's my 6:30 alarm. But when you look at the numbers here, it is absolutely mind-boggling how the Aetius's forces had no chance numerically. They had no chance, no matter how you slice up the numbers, no matter if you use minimalist numbers of 15,000 versus 45,000 or 30,000, no matter if you stack whatever. Now, if you have 20 to 30,000 troops versus 100,000, probably more likely, you're romanticizing it to an extent, but it looks a little more close to what it seems like what happened. And what happened is that the response from now I'll actually compliment the barbarians, Theodoric and his son, and the Le Roi de France, who was, I think, Childeric's dad. It might have been Melavé, I think. Their reaction, no, I think it was Melavé. Cool. Their reaction is not, oh my gosh, we're up against, so many Huns. It's, you can just do stuff. I'm joking.
Yeah, let's go
They're
get
just
them.
like, yeah, let's get them. Now, the difference is they've whipped themselves up into a battle frenzy. You know what I mean? They've basically, okay, the Goths have whipped themselves into a berserker rage. The Franks are basically doing what I tend to put into they're infected by what I would call battle joy, which is the total opposite of battle rage. They're so excited at a good fight, they throw themselves in like they're Goku. Mm-hmm. They're just like, ooh, overwhelming odds just means more glory for us. So we're just going to slaughter as many of these bastards as we can. So the problem is these barbarians with Aetius actually up to the job. They're going, it was going to be fun. We're going to butcher you. And the Huns are coming in going, this is just going to be another army we can just intimidate. Oh, they're not intimidated. Damn. What's our next move? And the battle, takes off, and the first one to claim the high ground are the Goths. Now, in the fighting, Theodoric falls, but when he dies, victory is basically secured. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't die for nothing.
Nope.
And it's actually good for Aetius because, it gets rid of one potential troublemaker later. But at the same time, it's bad for him because he did need Theodoric's help. But Theodoric's son is just, at the fall of his dad is going, like he reacts like Eomer. Well, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields is basically the Battle of the Catalonian Plains.
It is. It straight up is. You've got Theodoric and Theoden. Theodoric's son is Thorismund. Of course, that doesn't,
sound like Eomer.
Doesn't sound like Eomer, but they have pretty much the same role. Theodoric is 61 years old in this battle and dies in the front line. And it said that his body was recovered
It
around
was.
piles of his enemies.
Mm,
He was in the thick of it, and his death spurs the Visigoths on. Much like Aomir, you can imagine Thorismund and the Visigoths screaming death as they
yeah.
and ironically they were directly opposed to the Ostrogoths, who at this point were more distant relatives, um, and
Mm,
they smashed through the Ostrogoths.
for
Uh,
nothing.
and, yeah, like they're nothing after this, and they end up catching Attila on the flank. Aetius was uh, holding his own against the Huns. He was directly lined up against Attila. Um,
Which now here's the thing. I've actually had one professor accuse Aegeus of cowardice. I
oh,
have no idea why. But
okay,
Aetius took on the most dangerous job.
he did, he
I'm
did.
going to hold off
Um,
Attila myself. Now,
you know,
I'm just having to
we
interrupt there because he gave himself the most difficult job. Attila always tortures to death, the enemy commander, especially
mhm.
if he can capture them if they're opposite him. So Aetius is putting himself in the worst position. He gave himself the most difficult job. He is embodying this virtue. I would not give a job someone something to do if I'm not willing to do it myself. He's giving Theodoric. Now, Aetius is not chasing glory. He's giving Theodoric the chance to chase glory. He's giving himself the not fun job.
Yes, and the charge of cowardice can and should actually be put on Attila.
Yeah.
I've got this quote from Jordanes about the battle, specifically about the arrangement of the forces on the field. Um, he says, "Quote: Now Theodoric with his Visigoths held the right wing, and Aetius with the Romans the left of the line against Attila. On the other side, the battle line of the Huns was so arranged that Attila and his bravest followers were stationed in the center. In arranging them thus, the king had chiefly his own safety in view, since by this position, in the very midst of his race, he would be kept out of the way of threatened danger.
Hmm.
Attila intentionally stationed himself behind the front line in the very middle around his bodyguard. You
Yep.
have um, you have Aetius conspicuously putting himself as the Roman with the Romans in front of Attila as like a come and get me kind of force.
He's bait.
Uh, he's bait, and the Gothic cavalry under Thorismund take the hills on the right side of the battle,
Hmm.
and they defeat
The
the Hunnic
Ostrogoths.
horse. The Hunnic horse race up to try to take the hills from them, and they push them back.
Hmm.
Uh, and that is what Attila used to spur his army on. Like he shamed them into advancing on this army, and that is when the Visigoths came into battle with the Ostrogoths
Hmm.
after defeating the Huns in the hills.
Yep. And when that's done, the battle is basically concluded.
Yep,
And here's the thing that's not emphasized enough. Attila's army is mauled
yep,
because once they sniff blood, the Visigoths, the Frank, and all the other tribes, and all the Gallo-Romans of Gaul smell blood, and like a bunch of hounds on a wounded antelope or a wounded, um, well, on a wounded deer, they just jump on
hmm
it and start tearing into its flesh. So Attila, at that point, has to flee. Now, there's another charge. Aetius deliberately slowed his own pursuit because he wanted to spare Attila. I don't believe it. Um, Now, Attila flees down south through Italy. Well, now, there's historians who are going, why would you make that choice? Well, here's the thing: the surviving Germans would have been angry at him for defeat and would have turned on him. So he can't actually go north of the Alps now because that's the riskier route. He has to go south of the Alps. It's just faster and it's less risky because the Germans are going to kill him. You don't lose a battle this big and walk away. That's the
hmm
that's the German mentality at the time. they had no real will. They would turn on their own commander, as we've seen historically up until this point. So the thing is, um, now Germans of today would never do that, but Germans back then would.
Yeah.
It's just a barbarian way. And so Aetius is in hot pursuit. Attila is basically just going, frick, he's right behind me.
Mm-hmm.
He's going straight, and he's pretty much not going to really stop until he gets back to, his empire. With Aetius having to stop the advance because he can't just invade the Hunnic Empire because that'd be stupid. He does not have the material resources.
He doesn't have an army of his own.
Yeah, as he's pursuing Attila, though, Aetius is bleeding troops because they have to all go home. This is the first real feudal levy. Really, it's more feudal levy that he had. So a lot of the barbarian feudal levy and the Gallic reservists he called upon have to go back home. So he's left only really with a small scout group, I guess. Like a small piddly ass nothing. So he's pursuing Attila, and Attila's going, no. Now, there's that old folk tale of Pope Leo scared, meeting with Attila, and Attila's moved and whatnot. No, Attila wasn't the kind of guy to be moved. This is one folk tale I always hated. I always found it retarded. I'm a Catholic, but I find this story the most stupid story in history I've ever seen and heard. Pope Leo comes along, tells him, "Oh, please, oh, please don't burn Rome and Italy to the ground." And Attila goes, "Oh, you poor thing, I won't. Don't worry." Come on, really, guys?
Well, when you put it that way.
No, it's not because a sensitive old man came to his tent and begged and groveled and gave a good blowjob. Yeah. No, that's not what happened. Leo, I don't think he even met with Attila. I don't think he did. I think it's just Attila took one look behind him and went, Aetius is still, he is still behind me. I do not want to be caught by him. And, it's basically run away. And you have Aetius who's just in pursuit. Now, the historians think, why didn't he just pursue him into the Hunnic Empire? Stupid. There's fortresses. That's Attila's heartland. You cannot go in there. Not to mention, the Huns have an alliance with the Eastern Empire. You go in, the East will hit you from behind, and the Huns will hit you from the front. I know a lot of people romanticize how things were in that, the East would have backed Aetius. No, the East was hostile. No. It's a hostile force that is in alliance with Attila to an extent. So you're kind of caught between these two forces, and you have no support back home because you also got to bear in mind Valentinian. So it's almost like being caught between three. So Aetius has to withdraw and reluctantly let Attila go. Likely Aetius felt the job was done and felt like a failure. They had not finished Attila off. But thankfully, Attila would die in a marriage bed. Apparently, he failed to violate another maiden and would perish due to a blood clot in his brain or assassination. Who knows? Yeah. Either way, the Scourge of God, as he's called, received vengeance from God, and God had the last word on it. Good for him. And Aetius, though, the very model of chivalry, would be assassinated because of Valentinian, the retard.
Classic late Roman activities. Assassinating, executing your top military guys.
Yep. The imbecile would have Aetius done away with, and in return, Aetius's supporters would do the only honorable and rational thing. They would slaughter the emperor in turn a year later. And I say that's honorable because it was. I don't consider it usurpation. I do not consider it regicide, because when the king kills, when the monarch is deliberately attempting to destroy his own nation, he is no longer the monarch. He is
Yep.
just a foreign occupier, a tyrant
Yep.
to be done away with. And that is ultimately what Valentinian became. He was so, but it does not remove from Aetius's accomplishments. He rose from nothing, like Stilicho, perhaps even less than Stilicho. He
Mm-hmm.
rose to unite barbarians and Romans together after they had been divided for decades. We have to bear in mind the division did not end, but Aetius forged them together in a weird kind of union, used what we can term the first feudal levy, and defeated the largest army of the time period. The largest army of the time.
Largest and undefeated army.
Yes. And he not only defeated them, but utterly annihilated them and wiped them out. Probably, like, I've heard, like, in terms of percentage, it might have been only 10 or 20%. It was probably near to like 60% or something that he just slaughtered. Because I think it'd be more maximalist numbers that most of those men were left on the field. Because Attila, the way he fled so quickly, suggests he only had a skeleton crew compared to before. Because the number that makes it back home and the number that left home are very different numbers. Because when I looked at the notes, like, and whatnot, of 100,000 as a possibility, only, like, I think it was like 20%. No, it was like, I think like 15 to 20,000 made it back home. What happened to the other 80,000, huh? You know what I mean? It's like, well, we can't explain. No, we can. They were slaughtered. Let's just call it what it is. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains, La Bataille Catalanique, as we call it, is a massacre. It's not really a battle, it's a massacre. As Aetius and the barbarians, what's the Shakespearean phrase? Cried havoc and let loose the dogs of war upon Attila. And the battle competency between these barbarians and the Huns could not be more like night and day. The Huns and their coalition fight poorly and are just slaughtered. But it's also something that a lot of historians have said, it's not black and white. No, it absolutely is. Attila's evil, and Aetius and his forces are good because they're just defending their homes at this point, while Attila and his forces are slaughtering and torturing everyone they run into. Like, it can't be more night and day.
Yep.
And the results are night and day. Like, they don't really inflict that many losses on the coalition, and the coalition in turn slaughters them.
Yeah.
So it's one of those battles that, ironically, historians of the 19th and early 20th century found they would use the term glorious to describe it because they were just like, it's so glorious. Our ancestors just slaughtered those Huns like they were cattle. And the term should be used. It is, and the only thing that is that I would say as a demoralization tactic, historians have put an emphasis on the death of Aetius and what happens after rather than the battle. But to a lot of previous generations, it was glorious because Aetius had no resources, had no army, and defeated Attila completely and utterly and crushed him and annihilated most of his armies. That is glorious. That is amazing. And it is the power of the great men of history. It is the power of genius and of charisma and compromise. Because he did compromise to get his coalition. So it's just something that I find Aetius does not get the credit he deserves. Although what's interesting is that, and this is frightening, is that when I went to university for a variety of university courses and whatnot, on all sorts of history, Aetius was not in any of the textbooks. Now, in my high school, my French high school, Roman history courses, he was. But there's only one line in some of these history of Western civilization books with reference to him in the battle. It says he won, that he died in, I think, 454.
Yes.
He's been expunged. And I find that's demoralization in action because, when people look at this battle, they go, wow, look at that. That's glorious. That's the power of the Western Roman Empire, just throwing everything in the kitchen sink and scaring the shite out of these foreign invaders and winning. And that's a problem because we should be teaching Aetius. We should be teaching the Battle of Catalonia to our kids. That it's not is, I would say, very pointed. But from what I understand in files, I don't know if it's still in the education system. I don't know. I've not yet had a glance at the history textbooks. But when I've talked to at least one teacher here, he knew of it. But like I said, when I was a little kid, when I was not a little kid, but like a teenager, I studied the battle. I thought it was cool. So it's something that should be studied because it'll teach the wee lads pride, joy, because it'll give them, like, yeah, you have to teach them about the fall of the Roman Empire and that, yeah, it after this, the Roman Empire still fell or was transfigured, if you will, into the church. But this brings up the question, what was the point if it was all going to fall? Well, the point was survival, for one thing, because Attila would not, he would slaughter them to a man. But another point was this. Now, I know a German who said something very interesting. And what he said was that he doesn't really believe in the great replacement. Now, hear me out. He said he does not believe in the theory. He says, that's not what's happening. He said, what's happening is that people of European descent are still mostly breeding with only people of European descent. And what's happening is instead we are being pushed into working blue-collar work, which is work that was usually reserved for the slave caste in traditional times. We are being pushed into a servile caste to serve others. And his theory is very interesting. He said, is it better to rule in heaven or serve in hell? Which he said we made an almost utopic set of nations, but we're being forced to serve them under hellish conditions. So we're not being, you see the inversal of Dante's line, better to rule in heaven than to serve in hell, has been the mentality. And it's an interesting outlook. But see, that applies to an extent with what the Western barbarians, Aetius, we are not going to serve Huns. We are not going to slaves. We're not going to allow ourselves to be sold into slavery. We're not going to let our daughters be rule here. These are our lands. And if there are going to be barbarians that rule in the West, they're going to be Romanized barbarians. They're going to be Christian barbarians. They're going to be ours, not yours. So it's a bit of a pointed, get out. We don't want you, to Attila and his Huns. So it's about defending what's yours. It's also about honor. Because the mentality that these barbarians had was they didn't go into the battle at first thinking victory was assured. They went in thinking, this is it, the last hurrah. We're going to fight like devils. We are better to die on your feet than on your knees. And you also have to bear in mind they were a little shamed into it because a young girl in Paris had rallied a city of frightened people, and she had led them to victory over Attila. That's humiliating for grown men. Like 30,000, 20 to 30,000 men are having to hear about how this little girl resisted Attila, pushed him back, and they're like, "Are we really going to run away when a little girl was able to beat him? Like, who she showed more courage than we do if we run away. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she could have abandoned Paris and fled west or something, but she didn't. So we cannot let ourselves be outdone by her. We have to
Hmm.
show that we're men worthy of her. You know, that's always the mentality. So we need to be worthy of women like her. We need to fight to our last breaths and fight and kill and dominate the battlefield here. Because if we're to lose, we're going to lose taking as many of them down with us. And that's what it's about. That's honor. You know, you have to fight for what's yours and you have to hold. And ultimately, they do. And that they won is a victory for honor and also for the fact that loyalty, uh, home, faith means something. This is at least the lessons that those like Tolkien took from it. This means something. Now, I'm not asking people to sign up to conspiracy theories or politics. I'm just saying, look at the values on display. Attila, it's just gluttony, destruction, and violation. On
Hmm.
Aetius, then, it's honor, home, hearth. It's also defending your woman. That's what it boils down to.
Christianity.
Yes, Christianity,
Hmm.
light and dark. Will the light of civilization go out, or will it shine a light for the next 2,000 years? And I would say that's a victory.
Yep.
So next time we'll be moving on to your boy, Justinian,
Nah.
which I cannot wait.
Yes. Yes.
And
The
it's late where
Justinian
you,
Belisarius. Yes, I'm so excited for that. And yes, Joe,
yeah,
it's late. It's midnight.
yeah.
Uh,
So we're
it's
gonna
midnight.
stop here. We went over long. This should have been 2 episodes, but
Should have been.
uh, yeah. But we like this so much, so hope you all will tune in. Don't forget to subscribe to Maverick Culp's Federati Digest.
Yes, correct. On Substack. Uh,
Yeah.
specifically named after the events we've covered in
Hmm.
this episode. Literati
Uh,
Digest on Substack. That's my publication name. You can also find me on Substack through my real name, Maverick Culp,
yep.
Culp. Um, I'm there. Uh, Me and Joe do these as often as we can.
Yeah.
Um, and
These are sometimes the
I
highlight
try
of
to,
my week.
oh yeah, me too. When I can finally get the time to sit down and talk, it's just the best. Um, now that my baby's sleeping more, my fourth, I'm starting to get more time, and hopefully I'll be able to put out full length articles soon again on these
Hmm.
topics.
And I'm hoping to write about this battle soon because I have notes. I've got all this. I really want to write just about this but I want to first finish my Lionheart essay I finished for
Yes,
Michael,
yes, of
which I've been
course.
writing for months. Poor guy's been so patient with me.
He's a
I
good
got to
dude.
finish. Yeah, he's a good dude. So shout out to him and Modern Caesar, both of them who
Hmm.
encouraged us to tackle this. So I'm going to
Yes.
finish my Lionheart essay this week, and then I'm going to move on to this battle because I gotta write about this battle. It's the battle to
Hmm.
end all battles.
My article on it from last year is still probably my favorite that I've written.
Send it to me.
It's
I
okay.
must reread it. I think
I
I've read it.
will.
I must.
I think it's what got you to notice me
Yeah, I might
was
have.
this article last year. All
Yeah, I
right,
think
Joe.
I squealed like a schoolgirl over it. Um, but anyways, take care, everyone. Don't forget to sub to Maverick, and we will see you next time.